Hey everyone, welcome back to another advanced sports analytics application tutorial. In this video, I'm going to be covering how to use our PGA pin shot projection and optimization tool. You can find this tool in our PGA drop-down menu. The application consists of 4 tabs in which you can use inputs to specify your projection and optimization runs. The first tab is the slate settings tab, where you simply select whether you're playing DraftKings or FanDuel. The second tab is the projections tab, which have player raw projections as well as various information that might help you decide on your lineup construction, and also some opportunities to finagle with exposure limits so that you can have some control on kind of how narrow or how wide your player pool is. The third tab, the optimals tab, where optimal lineups are output. And there's some other features in the sidebar where you can, again, have more control over kind of what your lineup construction looks like. And the last tab is the exposure tab, which simply shows the percentage of your optimal lineups, which you have certain players selected in those lineups. So just kind of a good way to see which players are popping into the optimals most frequently. So a useful tab to pay attention to. In the projections tab, you can do really 2 main functions: modify and control player exposure limits, and also edit projections manually. And there's really 2 core ways in which you can make these modifications. You can either make modifications in application, or you can make them through CSV download and upload flexibility. So I tend to prefer the CSV download and upload flexibility. It gives you the opportunity to save your progress and keep a file over the course of the week that has any sort of edits or changes you've made. When you do in-app edits, you will lose those edits whenever the app refreshes, or if you leave the app static for like more than 15 minutes, the app will go into sleep mode, and then you'll have to refresh and lose any sort of edits or changes you've made. But let's go over first the in-app editing capabilities. So first I want to talk about exposure limit settings. So you can, the app will default to allow up to 100% exposure for all players. You can provide kind of a sweeping exposure limit for players in the max exposure input here in the top left. So like right now with 100% exposure, I think like you saw, like Tony Finau was popping in at 95% of optimal lineups. But if you wanted to set an exposure limit of 50% for all players, you'd see that update in the exposure column. And now when your lineups run, you are limiting your exposure to 50% for all players. And you can go back in and also just make player specific edits in the app interface. So if you go to the exposure column and double click on a player's exposure value, you'll open up the text editor and you can type in a value that's maybe different from your max exposure. So like if we wanted to allow up to 80% exposure for Rory and suppress Matsuyama's exposure to like only 20%, we could do that. And then to lock in your edits, you just hit Control Enter, and that will lock in the new exposures you've set. So we have 50% exposure for the entire player pool, but then these specific edits for Rory and Matsuyama, and we'll notice now we get 80% exposure for Rory, and Hideki down here at only 20%. And, keep in mind, these are just exposure maxes. So Rory, in this projection system was projected to be a pretty valuable play and the highest raw score on the slate. But if you set like a lower, kind of lower value player at some exposure max, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to fill up to that exposure. It just means that their exposure will be capped at the exposure limit you're setting. Another edit you can make in app is to the player projection. So again, you can either click on the columns and open that up and like make a just point-based edit. So if we wanted to add 2 points to Rory's projection and subtract 3 points from Justin Thomas's projection, we can do that here. We can also edit players' projections through a percent-based boost. So if we wanted to boost Matsuyama's projection by, I don't know, 5%, we could type that in here. Or conversely, if we want to negatively boost a player, like negatively boost ROM by 3%, we can type that in. And again, we'll lock in our edits, and you can see, players' projections will update. So Matsuyama, I forget what he was at, 0 boost, but he's now up to 82 projected DraftKings points, and we've seen Rom's projections drop a little bit. Justin Thomas, his projections are now lower down. So that's, a useful way you can edit in-app, but keep in mind if we're refreshing, so I'm going to refresh my screen, we'll lose any progress that we made. We start back from, 100% exposure, no boosting. So it is, it's nice for kind of quick edits, but if you really want to make changes and kind of save those changes you've made and maybe store like a file over the course of the week, I really like the download and upload capability. So you can download a player, download the projection file, and make edits to your CSV. So, if we wanted to edit Rory up to 86 and, maybe set an exposure cap on him of like 80, we can do that in here. There's no drop down input for setting that max exposure, but if we wanted to set like 50%, we could just type that in and then save that down. And, now we have that 50% applied to everyone. If we wanted to bring Matsuyama down to only 20%, we could do that in here. Any sort of boosting, stuff like that. So, boost Matsuyama by 3%. The changes, obviously won't happen in CSV. If we wanted to boost Web up by 10%, et cetera, you can do that and then save out your file. And then you just upload this back into the application interface, and it's going to bring in any sort of changes you made in the CSV into the interface. So you can see now we got that 50% exposure max on everyone. And that's going to contradict in here. If you were to change this down to 50, it would reset everyone to 50. But, and we're holding our boosts for players, stuff like that. So pretty cool, way for editing and kind of how I prefer to manage projections and make manual edits. I think it's really useful where you can save your progress, stuff like that. The other thing I want to call out, just we do have player strokes gained metrics presented in the projections tab. So if maybe for a specific course you're really focusing on strokes gained approach or off the tee or what have you, you could sort by that strokes gained metric and kind of see which players are bubbling to the top based on certain strokes gained part of their game. And it's going to default to show strokes gained in each category over the last 6 months, but you can toy around with that and, show more recent form or longer form. So it's kind of, you can figure out what it is you're looking for and kind of how, if you want to pay more attention to recent form or, you're willing to accept less recency, but larger sample size with one of the longer form metrics. So anyways, pretty useful. I think if you're kind of trying to build lineups around certain strokes gain categories. In the optimals, I'm also just going to reset projections. So again, just refreshing and getting back to those base metrics. In the optimals column, you're going to be outputted with your optimal lineups and how much their total salary is, projected fantasy points, stuff like that. You can toy around with how many lineups you want to generate. It's going to default to show 20, but if you want to go all the way up to 150, you can type that in there. If you want to lock or fade a player, full lock or full fade, you can do that here, and that will override any sort of exposure limits. So if we were to set max exposure to 50, but lock in Rory, we're still going to get 100% exposure on Rory. And the fade's not really a contradictory thing. But if we wanted a full fade Rory, can add him in here. Full fade, 0% exposure on Rory. So a good thing to keep in mind. And I just think that's useful. If there's a player that we're projecting favorably, that's putting into lineups a lot and you just want to completely X them out, going the full fade route is useful. set our exposure limits back up to 100. And another feature we've added in this tab is max salary used. So the optimal lineups are going to seek to just fill, optimizing towards projected fantasy points. And but if you want to build lineups that are below like 50,000 salary, maybe you're trying to build a set of tournament lineups that maybe sacrifice kind of maximum projected value, but have higher likelihood of being truly unique lineups by just being lower salary. You can type in some salary max, and you won't build lineups. The optimization program won't build lineups that exceed that cap that you're setting. And then if you just delete it, it'll default to 50,000 for DK or 60,000 for FanDuel. Another interesting way you can kind of have control over the shape of your lineups is through player min and max salary. So like looking at this top lineup right now, I think based on these projections, like a guy like Hubbard and Wolf were guys that found their way into a lot of our optimals. And maybe for certain contest types, you really want to focus on a more balanced build and are willing to trade maximum projected fantasy points for just more balance, and you want to avoid any of these like sub 7 guys for risk of maybe missing the cut. You could set a minimum player salary here. So if we type in 7,000, we're now only going to fill lineups with players that are above 7,000. So guys like Hubbard or Wolf are going to be X'd out of the lineup, and it's just going to coerce a little more of a balanced build. So we're kind of seeking out, guys who aren't like super, dumpster dives. And kind of the effect of that usually is that when you raise your player floor, it'll also more times than not also bring down the ceiling that you spend at. So like Rory's a guy that's just not appearing in many of these lineups because there's just no way, there's not a very good or feasible way to fit in, a premier price guy like Rory and also avoid these, sub 7 guys. So useful way there. Or conversely, you could kind of do it on the other side. So forget what Roy's salary is, 11.3. So like if we wanted to, I don't know, only take players who are below 10.5 in salary, we could do that here. And, now guys like Rory are going to be dropped out, or, Justin Thomas, DeChambeau, Rahm will be able to sneak in there. You can see him here, but it'll prevent you from gaining exposure to super high priced players, which I think really the impact of that is, again, you just get these more balanced builds, although we do see like Wolf and Higgs, kind of some cheaper guys still sneaking in there. But yeah, just an interesting way to kind of shape your lineup builds and try to coerce more balanced builds if you're interested in that, or allow kind of the full, just allow the optimization to do its thing and kind of pick the lineups that are projecting for the most fantasy points. And yeah, lastly, the exposures tab, there's not too much you can do here. Back to the optimals tab. So a cool thing that you can do, we've done this with all of our other sports projection optimization tools, but we're allowing for a raw download of projected lineups, which will, give you your lineups in like MME uploadable format with player IDs and all that stuff. So a pretty cool way if you're, trying to do big MME builds and, are looking to not enter by hand, but enter through CSV upload. We do allow for that functionality with the download, feature here. And another just, I think, good thing to call out is the download feature in the projections app. Like maybe you have your own optimization program that you're using and want to save out like the projections we have and feed those into, your own optimization program. Could be a useful way to kind of use this download button, the projections tab, not with the interest of uploading them in to our program, but uploading them back into another program. Good thing you could do there. And yeah, the exposures tab, like I said, not too much really special here, just showing and reporting kind of player exposures. If you wanted to sort on or search for a certain player rather, you could do that here. So like if we wanted to pull up Hatton's exposure, you can do that with the search. But yeah, that's really it. No sort of editing, more just a back checking of lineups to see how kind of they are shaking out. So yeah, I hope you guys like the tool and find it useful. We're going to keep working on our projection model. I think there's some cool features we could add to the projection model that might improve accuracy. So we'll keep working on that. If you guys are using the optimizer tool and are finding some features useful, some features less useful, or have ideas or recommendations for kind of gadgets you'd like to see built into the tool, definitely let us know, and we'd be happy to consider those edits. You can either reach out to us on Twitter or by email, and yeah, we'll do what we can to create a tool that's going to work best for you guys. So yeah, that's about it.